I found my husband's diary, which I have here. It's his Beirut diary.
Okay.
This is it.
Okay.
And it's in his handwriting. He's a government assassin. Israelis train with the SEALs. They do a lot of wet ops, murders, over here. It's run by the mob. George calls them the members of the firm. It was a mob military partnership, joint. It was a joint operation, selling weapons to whatever country. I know the country, but in other words, they were doing work for the joint under the table all these years.
Okay, and directly under whose instructions to sell these weapons? Do you know that?
Yeah.
Okay, and who would that be?
Well, it's the Israeli Zionist group in New York.
Mossad? No.
Well,
what would they
yeah,
say?
but everybody thinks Mossad, like they think CIA is just a bogus sort of thing. It's really Army intelligence that does just about everything. They run a lot of the psychological profiling, which is done at Quantico with the FBI. It's all a very small group. Harvard professors connected with, you know, the Tavistock and Dar es Salaam, and there's a sexual perversion group in Vienna and one in Colorado. I think that little girl was part of that experiment. You know, my husband was the chief of staff for General Al Gray, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps. He's a homosexual.
Gray.
Gray.
Okay.
He's what they call a cherry Marine. It's run by the mob. It was a mob military partnership, joint. It was a joint operation. The highest levels of the Marine Corps and the Army in those special operations levels, the individuals are actually in the mob. I'm talking about the Brooklyn, New Jersey mob. They do a lot of money laundering in the banks, cash transactions for the drugs that they're bringing over through Latin America. And they're all Brooklyn. Cap Weinberger, Heinz Kissinger. There's the Boston mob, which was shipping weapons back and forth to Northern Ireland. Goes Israel, some of the Zionists who came over from Germany, according to my husband, were, he works with those people. They do a lot of money laundering in the banks, cash transactions for the drugs that they're bringing over through Latin America, the Southern Mafia, the Dixie Mafia, which is now my husband's involved with in Miami. Still, the 4th Marines is out of New Orleans, and that's been going on a long time, ever since Disraeli. In the intelligence world and in the communist world and the world that my husband was in, one had to know French because all of the terrorist trainers and the guys who were funding all the guerrillas and everything were in Paris and New Orleans. They had hit squads and you know, undercover groups in New Orleans. Do terrorist training, Lake Pontchartrain and places like that. After I was calling everywhere to see if I could find my husband, he would, you know, disappear at times. General Jim Joy and General Carl Steiner they're evil men. And they are in this diary meeting with my husband almost every day in Beirut. They trained the men in black who killed those people in Waco. Steiner's Army, dirty tricks, special operations. This is what my husband does for a living, is train mercenaries, young boys from countries like Romania, Dominican Republic, Haiti, all these countries. They're training them to be murderers. And the taxpayers' dollars are paying for this. They psychologically profile them. The profile, which is similar to my husband's and Lee Harvey Oswald's and McVeigh's and some of the others who were all part of this program. Jeffrey Dahmler was profiled and hidden. You know, what most Americans do not know is that all of these men were
Jeffrey
Army.
Dahmer, he has a military background?
Of course. They're all Army.
Oh, okay.
They were all picked out because they're perverted or twisted. Sexually perverted. I don't think McVeigh was perverted the way Dahmler was, but certainly the group that my husband is overseeing are twisted. Strong mother, weak father, no father, poor. Because these guys are looking for security, so they will stay in the military and do anything for that security. This was my husband's scenario. My husband and Oswald are just two peas in a pod. The same personality, the same type, in the same elite group, I might add, which was doing work with communists and Russians, with Czechoslovakians and with Romanians. I met assassins, I met drug lords. He knows the elite of the elite of the elite, and that's why I was warned twice not to talk. I was told that I would be killed. My husband warned me early on. It was Sarah McClendon, the senior White House correspondent, who saved my life. Because she said, Mrs. Griggs, you get up here to Washington right now or you're dead. He's a robot, my husband, except when he's drinking. And I think that's why he drank, because the first 3 years of marriage, he was telling me everything. You know, when you're talking about shooting people like ducks, the only thing I can relate it to is my brother's going duck hunting, and that's what George would tell me it was like. Killing is just, you know, it's nothing. There's no emotion involved. You just get rid of somebody. Very matter of fact, his group they are not Christians. They're what he calls existentialist, and they study German Clausewitz and Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus, Montesquieu. And his thesis at Princeton, which was written for him by a very good friend of his named Todeve, who was a French count, and his thesis was on this. An existentialist, according to my husband, which he is one, Fred, hence all of these people are existentialists, they believe in doing whatever it takes. It doesn't matter what the law says. They will do anything necessary to get what they want politically. He could not have written that by himself. I know that. I know it was written for him. He's a government assassin. He was like my husband, a government assassin, killing people.
Okay.
He's a mercenary, government mercenary. In the intelligence world and in the communist world and the world that my husband was in, one had to know French because all of the terrorist trainers and the guys who were funding all the guerrillas and everything were in Paris and New Orleans, 1980s.
Okay.
From I think New Orleans has been a school for a place where debauchery and murder and cults. You see, Oswald, my husband and Oswald were in the same club. General Jim Joy is in that club. General Louis Buell, who is my husband's benefactor, or whatever you want to call it, is in that club. There are Russians in that club. It was a mob military partnership, joint. It was a joint operation in Korea and in Vietnam. The highest levels of the Marine Corps and the Army in those special operations levels, the individuals are actually in the mob. Terry are all involved once they retire. They're, they go into this drug and secondary weapons sales. I'm talking about the Brooklyn, New Jersey mob. Vietnam was really important because a lot of experiments were done on boys who went over there. 3rd of July, 1996 was when I came out with a small group of people. They have been psychologically trying to destroy me, financially trying to destroy me, because I'm telling the truth. Before that time, they were trying to handle me, to try and get me to be quiet. They tried threatening me and so forth. I called General Jim Joy on the phone. I was trying to find where my husband was because I didn't know whether I'd have any money to, food to eat or what. He just walked away, and I knew that the Marine Corps knew where he was. But I was being handled psychologically. In March, my home was broken into. They were looking for the diary, which I have here. This is it.
Okay.
And it's in his handwriting. Diary tells how the intelligence community, the Army and Marine Corps assassins, snipers, are how they operate in a city during a crisis. My husband was the liaison between the White House and President Jamal. So my husband is a friend of Scrowcroft, McFarland's a Marine. All of these men are personal friends of George's. Colby, I spoke with personally on the phone. 2 weeks later, he was murdered. This is William Colby, who was head of the CIA. I know exactly how that happened because, you see, the SEAL teams, SEAL Team 6, 4, 6, and 8 are on the East Coast, and then the odd numbers are on the West Coast. The Israelis train with the SEALs. They do a lot of wet ops, murders, over here. I met 3 young assassins on a bus, going up back and forth to Sarah as I went on the bus because they were sabotaging my car. I sat next to 2 young assassins, one from Romania, one from Haiti. And I let them know that I understand, how it is. And this little boy cried. The taxpayers are paying mercenaries. The taxpayers are paying young men who are not citizens of the United States to kill innocent people, women and children. They get on a flight from Norfolk and Oceana. They fly to Stuttgart, and I was told this is what they do. Then they go by a special helicopter to countries like Turkey, like the part of Iraq, to Algeria, to parts of Africa, and they do wet ops. They'll just, murder 5, 10, 20 people. And then they blame it on the Arabs, or they blame it on somebody else, but it's actually NATO rogue assassins. Because men from Australia, South Africa, Britain, that I've been able to determine, and a lot of these other little countries that are sort of wanting to get into NATO, they have little boys that they pick out, and they call them special. In order to entice these boys, because they don't have much ego. So if you call being a criminal, in other words, they are protected. They know that they are above the law. That's what my husband's above the law. My husband's JAG colonel lawyer is above the law. A lot of these guys who were judges had their wives gotten rid of. And it's a very small cult. Secret societies. Some of the same things that they do in cap and gown which is the Princeton version of Skull and Bones. And you see, my husband is frightened to death. I believe that his brother was murdered to keep him in. He had gone through 4 years of this mind control. His name was Charles Caddock, and another man named Alexander Robinson. Alexander Robinson was a Marine, very well connected, influential one who brought over the Saudis. George told me all this about Mohammed Faisal, Khalid Faisal, and Saud Faisal, and there were something like 32 brothers of the then in the mid-50s. It was actually the United States who chose that person because the United States, through Charles Caddock and that group, murdered the good one, the one whom everybody liked, who was well educated, and who was normal. In, I believe it was 1952, the well-educated Saudi was poisoned, died in Paris. His brother, his half-brother or whatever, who was the father of all these 32 boys, and the 3 oldest now were snuck into the United States. So I was looking for the Hun school because I knew they went there. And they're in all the brochures. They're very proud to say, you know, we have the Saudi royals went here. It was the Hun school, and my husband was one of the playmates. Charles Caddock was the bodyguard, quote-unquote teacher for these guys. They would go out and play in the woods, and they were doing homosexual things with them. It was a lot of money. They bought a big house. He was a little boy when he was, it's mind control. MK Ultra had a group of men, psychiatrists in New Jersey. Even his roommates in Princeton told me about it. George never, intentionally, he never introduced me to any of his friends. So I had to cold call all these people. I got their names and addresses, telephone numbers. I called all these roommates at the Hun School and at Princeton. Mm-hmm. They told me things about George and, you know, holding hands with, you know, with Caddock and other people, about being a cheerleader. He was a cheerleader for
at Princeton.
At Princeton.
Oh,
and
okay.
he traveled with the football team.
Okay.
And here is a guy like that. They put him in the Marine Corps. I don't think that was very nice. They wanted him long term. And it's because of the Saudis. This is what I believe and what his roommate believes. George got into Cap and Gown, which is the same kind of fraternity. I mean, it's an eating club at Princeton for intelligence officers. Cap and Gown has a lot of intelligence officers and boys who may have been raped. The initiation is they get very drunk, and even in the Marine Corps they do that. It's called dining in. They have the shellback ceremony. They do a lot of homosexual enticement. The boys are, when they come in, when they're new recruits, they strip them nude, they violate their personal parts. The cream of the crop is doing this. They're having group sex parties. These orgies are going on all over the Mediterranean, that the captains, lieutenants, the men who rise to the top are the ones who are picked to play the games, the pool parties, the nude pool parties. I've talked to 3 guys, and of course my husband, mm-hmm. who went to these parties. They would go to a place like Aix-les-Rosés, where Charles Caddock, this teacher who inducted, got my husband into it, he retired in one of these all-male party houses on the Mediterranean. Start off with the wild secretaries. It's kind of, you know, my husband did those in Indonesia. He did them at a place in Northern Virginia with his first wife. I did not know any of this. I knew absolutely none of this when I married him. He told me he was loyal to his wife. He wanted me to think he was just apple pie. When he was married to his first wife, was just an addict. He was a sexual addict, an alcoholic addict. He loves, you know, terror, and his whole little soul was just being sucked away from him. What he's doing now is running more of these operations. The difference between Bill Clinton, and I'm not saying Bill Clinton's better, but Bill Clinton did not go, he didn't know anything about the assassinations. Bill Clinton, when I was living with Sarah McClendon, the senior White House correspondent who saved my life, because she said, Mrs. Griggs, you get up here to Washington right now or you're dead. And I still feel as though I probably will be. I'll certainly be financially ruined. They are still doing psychological operations in my home, sabotaging my car. You cannot believe what I've been through in the last 2 years. It is horrible. It's being done to other women and other wives and other men who don't go along with the program. They are murdering Marines. They're murdering sailors. I must tell you about General Joy. I found his name all through the diary. George had mentioned him early on in the marriage, but then after a certain incident at Camp Lejeune, which took a lot for me to get General Joy's phone number, because the Marine colonels were not going to tell me, because they knew I was investigating. He's running morale, welfare, recreation for the world, you know, a payoff job with the mob. He's living outside of Quantico, and here's his phone number. So I call him up, and keep in mind, my husband is infamous, Princeton graduate, chief of staff for Al Gray, who runs all the dirty tricks for the Army. You know, Linda Tripp worked for Carl Steiner, who was a partner of you know, Jim Joy and Carl Steiner and my husband were the triumvirate in Beirut.
Okay. And
Linda Tripp worked for Carl Steiner. She and her husband were both Delta Force duos. She's a dirty tricks person, Linda. I call General Joy and I say, General Joy, this is Kay Griggs, and I'm George Griggs' wife, you know, chief of staff under Al Gray, head of half the world, dirty tricks, special operations, wet ops. And he goes, no, I don't believe I know your husband. Exactly his words. And I'm taping it, by the way, because they took my tape. They started coming in and putting sticky stuff and running my, you know, just mind-jagging me.
Putting sticky stuff
on the tapes, and they would put the tapes on different, you know, they would go to a lot of trouble. They would take things that I said on one tape and put it on another, and I mean, they were having fun with me psychologically. But I taped this conversation with General Joy, and I said, well, that's really strange, General Joy, that you don't know my husband, because I'm sitting here on my bed, and I'm looking at my husband's diary that he kept the whole time he was in Beirut. And you're in there almost on every page, you know, you're in there a lot. And you're going over to Cyprus and Rome, and you're, you know, getting money for weapons, and, you know, and then they're going to Tel Aviv, and they're doing this and that. I said, you mean you don't know my husband, George Griggs? And you're a Marine, and he's a colonel? He went, oh, that George Griggs. Because he knew I had the diary. Then he said, oh, Miss Griggs, let me call you back. Let me call you back. So he had to confer with General Sheehan, General Joy, General Gaiman, General Hartzog, and his little cabal, particularly General Gray. and General Krulak. He called me back, and he was just like a little puppy dog. He said, "Oh, Ms. Griggs, I'm going to be in Norfolk, meeting at the Marriott Hotel, and I would like to meet with you when I get there." He could not have been more insistent about meeting me. I did. But I was afraid of him because I knew he was an assassin.
Joy.
General Jim Joy, the one who got Noriega out of Panama.
Mm-hmm.
He and Sheehan, the one who was behind the whole operation in Panama. This is a powerful guy. He and Carl Steiner. Mm-hmm. Mutt and Jeff. Waco, they trained all the guys in Waco who went and did what they did to David Koresh. They're the ones behind all the black helicopters and Sheehan. They're the ones, you know, doing all the stuff down there at Kathy McDaniel's, down at, you know, in Fort Polk, Fort Hood, all ROTC scholarship. They left ROTC. They were dependent on the government, on the intelligence community, you know, selling weapons to whatever country. I know the country, but in other words, they were doing work for the joint under the table all these years.
Okay, and directly under whose instructions to sell these weapons? Do you know that?
Yeah.
Okay, and who would that be?
Well, it's the Israeli Zionist group in New York.
Mossad? No.
Well,
what would they
yeah,
say
but everybody thinks Mossad, like they think CIA is just a bogus sort of thing. It's really Army intelligence that does just about everything. They run a lot of the psychological profiling, which is done at Quantico with the FBI. It's all a very small group. Harvard professors connected with, you know, the Tavistock and Dar es Salaam, and there's a sexual perversion group in Vienna and one in Colorado. I think that little girl was part of that experiment, you know.
Here's a high-profile murder that goes nowhere. No investigation, nobody's pinned. It just goes on and on and on.
The parents are involved in that program.
But somebody higher
High
up
level.
is protecting them.
Absolutely.
And the same thing that you're describing about the military.
Sure.
If you're in the clique, you can get away with murder.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Murder, literally murder. I used to be set up by the State Department, my husband, who had power in the State Department, through both Caspar Weinberger and, well, his whole crowd. I mean, Caspar Weinberger, George Bush, Colby, Casey. My husband was in that clique. He was in the Princeton Marine Corps clique. Rob, Warner. I love people. So, and I was driven to meet all these people from all over the world for some reason. So they would feed me people because they knew I would react. It's kind of like Monica and Bill. I think they put Monica in there to have something on Bill. That's my own feeling. Sarah McClendon feels the same way. All Marines, Pat Robertson, all 4th Marines. I mean, they're all involved in this. They know, they're running everything. Yeah, there's a power thing there. And it's all male, it's all white, and they know the murders are going on. They're surgical, they're strategic, they're political. It was Delta Force. Linda Tripp was trained by Carl Steiner, who's in the diary with my husband. Carl Steiner is called a snake, and he tried to trip up Schwarzkopf. I mean, he was trying to take the whole Iraqi thing over because they had been baiting, you know, using the Israeli rogues in Turkey. They were having little zigzag wars. It's all to sell weapons. It's all about weapon sales. It's all about drugs. It's all about funny money.
Making money.
Of course. Krulak, who is the Commandant of the Marine Corps, his father, Victor Krulak, with this Russian, Czechoslovakian double agent Al Gray, who was enlisted at that time, rose right up to the top because they were involved with Butcher and to pick fights. And they were Army and Navy together, joint. George calls them the members of the firm, or the brotherhood. They're very close, and it's a small group, and it's very hierarchical. I had Caspar Weinberger's bodyguard farm me when I was at Sarah McClendon's.
Now, farm you.
Yeah, that's a term that they use. They're doing profiling on me. They profiled me. They knew I loved international people because I'd already demonstrated that. And there was a group of sexual psychiatrists from Vienna who came over. I have pictures of them. I was their escort. George was already gone, and I was intrigued that they were still sending me people. There's a whole range of psychiatrists who study perversion, sexual perversion. Harvard, Yale, Johns Hopkins, and this Colorado group. Dar es Salaam, where they train the black African terrorists. They train them in interrogation. They train the JAGs in interrogation methods and so forth. And a lot of these guys got their experience in Vietnam. Intentionally, they took these little boys. That's what they're doing in Bosnia right now. They're training future leaders in perversion. The British have a school that George was working with in Indonesia for a year. My husband was setting up on East Timor, a little place there in the mountains that had been set up by the Australians during World War II. It was involved, I think, with Burma and, you know, some of the killings that were going on in China and so forth. That Parker Host, T. Parker Host, this man who now controls my husband with Bob Edwards. Now, T. Parker Host was the Finnish consul and at one time he'd been the Norwegian consul, the Icelandic consul. I thought he was a really nice guy because he was outgoing, he seemed Virginian. I didn't know that much about him. But it turns out he has one shipping agency when I meet him in '85. He knows my husband's profession instantly because he brags about being with the mob. See, the mob runs the port of Norfolk. I mean, it's terrible to say, the bankers and then that. Then they have I can't say that.
You can't say what?
No. The ports are run by, it's a homosexual hierarchy.
Okay, it makes, that's not objectionable.
Well, okay. And in Norfolk, it's Walter Chrysler, Phil Hornthal, you know, they have the rich ones and then they get the little ones in by introducing him to the big guys. It's like George met Einstein. Einstein was in that little ring that the Saudis were in. It was a very elite.
No, you're saying Einstein?
Albert Einstein
Okay.
was in that little Princeton ring before he died.
Okay.
George, they partied together. So the Norfolk crowd runs the port. It's very organized and so forth. And I knew the person who was running the Maritime Association shipping agency, very nice man who was that way. But I didn't know it. Very nice guy. Well, his best friend was T. Parker Host. He lived with him for a while. Parker had some questionable associations with mob figures, with assassins. He was in the Burma Special Operations Command. He liked living a dangerous life, and he bragged about it to others. My husband and he gravitated to one another. And I thought it was wonderful because my husband didn't seem to have any friends. So what happened was, because my husband is so close to Bush and McFarland and Scrowcroft and all these guys, Parker starts getting in with my husband's friends and cultivating them. And he goes from having one shipping agency to dotted all over the place. He goes from being a Democrat in petty little Virginia politics and being the Icelandic Finnish consul to having big shipping deals going through Iceland and Finland and Norway. And my husband's setting up deals in Moss, Norway, which I was the president of the Sister City Association. I was being used while they were setting up, shipment places, transshipment places. I mean, I was witnessing all of this, and it all came back to me, just boom, like that. But Parker, it was so interesting. We had a hearing. I had a hearing with my husband. That very day, George Bush was in town. My husband was in town. My home was broken into while I was in court. Very strategically, I was called by a Marine colonel named Jack, who is very involved with the maritime shipping business, and he knew that I know a lot about that. He called me and invited me as a guest of his to attend the George Bush huge banquet with John Warner while my house was being robbed. My car was sabotaged that day. And guess who introduced George Bush? T. Parker Host. Now, he made it to the big time. Henry Kissinger, Heinz Kissinger. His real name is Heinz Kissinger.
Okay.
I have a first-hand story from Bob, who was there in Cambodia with Heinz.
A reporter was asking George Bush and others about the Order of the Skull and Bones. This really got out, that these guys are all inducted because they've got some kind of homosexual thing on them.
Indoctrination. Or induction. They have to do that.
Yeah.
They do that.
Yeah.
Even in a coffin. And it's even now coming into the military totally. The chiefs do that. They put them in the coffin. They do the bowling ball trick.
Okay, you're going to explain this. What happens when you get in the coffin? Why do you get in a coffin?
Oh, they get, when you get your eagles, that's a German thing.
Okay.
It's what the German high command did, and most of them, had the boyfriends and stuff, the Krupps and all of that. It is a German thing that they say goes back to Greece, and it's all the male Marine-looking men that they do it with. George said it's like a zoo. They get everybody really drunk, and they sometimes call it dining in. Shellback is another time that they do it. Not everybody does it, but the ones who do it, if they're young, they get right up to the top. It's a...
Okay, well, what actually do they do? They've got a coffin, they get inside this...
Anal sex. Oh, that. They put them in the coffin and they do things.
Okay, they perform things on each other?
Yeah, while they're all around there going drunk. Interesting is, now, the young SEALs, Delta Force, they have to break into houses. Their training exercise is to break into civilians' houses.
For practice?
For practice. An existentialist, according to my husband, which he is one, Fred, hence all of these people are existentialists, they believe in doing whatever it takes. It doesn't matter what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
They will do anything necessary to get what they want politically and economically and whatever. In other words, killing a leader, killing 5 people, killing 20 people, according to George, is a lot better than war. This is the way they rationalize it. Walt Whitman Rostow is a communist.
Okay, and in what capacity is he?
Oh, he was one of the wise men in Kennedy's administration. I think he was probably responsible for the movement that got Kennedy murdered. I believe it was an Israeli group which did it with some of these rogues. Kennedy's wise men were the Harvard crowd, and he was trying to bring them in to change things around a lot. Walt Whitman Rostow was the one who got us into the Vietnam War because he wanted to sell the weapons. He and Victor Krulak, who is the present commandant's father, Krulak was his lackey. Walt Whitman Rostow went with Taylor, General Taylor, and wrote the report that got us into the Vietnam War. And all the time that the Pentagon was saying no, 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 he was a cheerleader for the weapons sales. He and Henry Kissinger, Heinz. These were communists, named for communists. Eugene Debs Rostow and it's either his son or his other brother, runs the big Boston mob, the port there. His name is Nicholas Rostow, with the Weld, with William Weld. They've done all that drug business in Mexico for years. Had that Russian, the one who was murdered by the assassin, Tolstoy, competitor, Stalin's competitor, and Tolstoy became a Christian at the end. And you can't become a Christian. That's a death warrant. So they killed Tolstoy. Tolstoy was murdered by this same Parisian, Spanish, Czechoslovakian, Georgian, Russian group, which are all part of the former Abwehr.
You don't think of Trotsky?
Oh yes, you're right. It's a group which was run out of Paris, is still being run out of Paris. This revolutionary terrorist group, which is controlling these Marines and Army, Steiner's group. They all operate together. The man who started all of this program during Vietnam used communists who were in the Spanish communist movement. They actually promoted communists in the OSS, which was started by this William Donovan.
Okay.
So they were promoting and using communists who were actually wanting to get rid of our form of government as a stepping stone to world domination. So this group now in the Army and in the Marine Corps has communists at the very top who are really, existentialist. One world which has no religions in it. They're the ones who put Napoleon in power. They're the ones who put Oliver Cromwell in power. They put puppet people in power, and they actually run it from behind the scenes. Trotsky, as I understand it, was escaped from Russia. He had become a Christian, I understand, and was working with agents in the United States, Israel. And he was considered a threat. So he had to be silenced, killed. There's an excellent book which I have called The Mind of an Assassin, which is about the background of Trotsky's assassin, a young man named Ramon, who was trained. He was Soviet paid. I think he had experience in Spain. They organized it in Paris, I believe. And of course, up to the present time, there have been assassins operating out of Rome, Milan in particular, Naples, and Paris. All mob related. They use mob funding. And of course, drug money to pay for the weapons, which are brand new weapons. The Bosnia Bazaar, this is the reason we had the war in Bosnia. The war in Bosnia is simply a stage to train assassins, to be a market for brand new weapons, to be a marketplace so that the drug money can be used. And the Army runs the whole show. The CIA is a bogus thing. It's Training and Doctrine Command. It's NATO. It's SHAPE. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, started by Eisenhower. It's a totally independent corporation. Its main function is to sell weapons and launder money.
You're talking about CIA?
No, I'm talking about SHAPE.
SHAPE. Okay.
CIA is kind of bogus. I mean,
that's just
there.
A trade name for the media
oh, it's to
use.
confuse us. It's just to get us off the track. It's all being done by Army people who are now joint, because the word joint comes from the group that brought over a lot, and a lot of good people came over, but they came over illegally to kind of escape Nazi Germany, and one of the funding organizations was out of New York, and it was called the Joint. And Meyer Lansky, see, our mob, the organized crime, the Jewish Kabbalist group, really do this. They're killing people who are good on purpose, and they get brownie points with their little cult. This funding group in New York, they would pay for passports which were illegal, and in fact, my grandfather was involved with that. That's how I know so much about it, because my grandfather was told to keep silent and not to tell anybody, but of course he told my grandmother, and my grandmother told me, and I've told my children. Everybody knows they brought in probably more than 200,000 Nazi soldiers and SS and, you know, wacko scientists and psychologists, and all of them, most of them, had the German disease, you know, because it was their culture.
The German disease?
Yeah, the German disease is what the Pink Triangle boys were. Colonel Ron Ray writes about this. He's a Marine colonel, the Cherry Marines, the homosexuality in the group sex orgies and so forth, which brought down the German government, because Naples, which is where all of the Navy is doing their playing, I mean, today in Naples, these orgies are going on. It was where Krupp, the weapons manufacturer, used to take the German high command, and they would go into the Isle, on the Isle of Capri, into the Blue Grotto. And they would have big orchestras, and they'd bring in little boys, little Italian boys, who would be raped. They'd give them trinkets. And of course the mothers gradually found out, and just like me, it was one thing when there was just one of me. Now there are a lot more of us wives who are talking and telling truth. And it took those Italian women went to newspapers in Italy, they wouldn't listen. But when they went to the wives of these guys in Germany, it brought it all out. It brought the German government down because they were duplicitous in it. But what they were doing was pedophilia. They were raping, bringing in little boys. They involved the Catholic priests. It's an old culture. Is the reason there are a lot of things going on with children these days. The problem, as I see it, is that I think they're trying to destroy America and the basic Protestant Christian culture, where you have a militaristic society, which is where the rules are only for those people. And keep in mind that Meyer Lansky and Luciano, Lucky Luciano, and the other man, they chose to go to Italy. Luciano went to Milan. He wasn't banished to Naples and Milan. The two top mob families went there because of the weapons industry. They're selling weapons. I mean, that's what the military is doing. It's totally controlled by the mob. Who was MacArthur's nemesis? Albatross. It was none other than little old intelligence. I'm going to tell every move you make. Weinberger. Young, but he did it. He brought down MacArthur. Every move MacArthur was going to make, He broadcast it through the chaplain, his little intelligence network. And he got brownie points with the group because he brought down the big lion. You get rid of a big lion like that, you get a big job. They needed to get rid of MacArthur because he didn't want to keep the wars going. Trefay, who took over after the Vietnam War was over, and he was on C-SPAN. General Trefay, he had been holding this in for years. This man let it all out. He said, I took over at the end of the Vietnam War. I was in control, right? Big general charge. So I say, cut off the shipment of weapons. So I tell the Pentagon, cut off the shipment of weapons. He said, I got a phone call from Henry Kissinger saying the weapons are going to continue at the wartime rate. That's when all this stuff with China started. Agents, the New York, Brooklyn, New Jersey mob, were already training Mao. Mao was trained in Paris. One in Cambodia, Pol Pot.
Yeah.
They were homosexually, bless their little hearts, by priests. They were wonderful little boys sent there, turned, which is the word, when they believe their mothers and then all of a sudden the world's horrible and then they have these wonderful friends who are going to make them leaders.
Yeah.
They're turned psychologically, and it's a pattern. And so this is why it's so important to know what they are doing to innocent little boys in the Army and the Marine Corps today. Why is it that the ones who are this way rise up faster than the ones who don't? They're called rising stars.
Rising stars.
Rising, that's the word the State Department uses for those who are controlled.